Hello again. In this video, I want to talk about Eveline, the second short story that I'm now discussing. I will say, if you haven't posted in the discussion about Eveline, I would go and do that first before watching this video, because I'm probably going to talk about, some stuff related to the questions that I asked there. So I would like to get your opinions before you hear what I have to say about it. So I would go and do that first. But assuming you've done that, I guess I'll start just by talking a little bit about the plot of the story, and then I'll get into what I think about like the messages about gender and stuff. So obviously we have Eveline, right, who is what would it say, 18 or 19 years old. She is the daughter of this family. We have her father, who seems like an old drunk, basically. Who every once in a while will, just threaten Eveline or sometimes, is violent towards her. She has, I think, one older sibling, Henry, who we find out is like decorates churches or something and is never at the house. And then she also has two younger siblings, who she is basically raising since we find out that her mother has been dead for, I think, a few years or something like that. So that's kind of the setup, right? And she's living. That's where she starts in the story, and yeah, it's kind of about like how she doesn't like it. Again, if we look at the descriptions of the setting and everything like that, like I think the first line is the evening invaded the avenue or something like that. So I think similar to Araby, it has the same kind of dark, gloomy, negative sort of setting, right? Also takes place in Dublin, just like Araby. And then we find out that she has a plan to escape all of this, right? And she uses that word escape a bunch of times, I think. She has this boyfriend, Frank, who is a sailor of some kind or another, who apparently has a house in Buenos Aires, that he wants Eveline to come away with him and marry him and live as his wife in this house that he says he has in Buenos Aires. It doesn't seem like Eveline likes him all that much. It says like at first she just liked having a guy who was interested in her, and then it says she started to like him. So it doesn't seem like she really thinks all that much of Frank. And by the end of the story, it seems clear that the main attraction associated with him is just being able to escape her current life, right? And yeah, I would wonder like how common that's been throughout history for like women looking to get married. Like really how much of the time is it a case of like women marrying out of love versus out of like getting out of whatever conditions that they're in. I think of like not this is necessarily what happened, but it reminds me of like my story of my own parents. My mom, I think, was 19 when my parents got married, and she had seven other siblings, and she always talks about how she just hated like living in the house with them and she wanted to get out so bad. And then she also got married really young, so I always kind of wonder about like how that works. But whatever, that's just an example. Okay, so that's kind of the rough plot, and then at the end, they're about to get on the boat to go away, and Eveline, kind of similar to the boy in Araby at the end, right? Kind of freezes and doesn't know what to do, and then doesn't do the thing. So just like in Araby, where the boy was going to go to the bazaar to buy a present, Eveline, maybe this is on a bigger scale. She's also older, right? Eveline was going to go away to Argentina, and then neither of them do it at the end of the story, right? Both of them, for kind of unexplained reasons, sort of don't do the thing that the whole story has been building up to, Like, and if we think about it, like from the point of view of like structure, it's like the whole story is building to this thing, and then it just doesn't happen. It's like, yeah, like refusing to give us that like happy ending or something, or that the climax of the story that way. Okay, so that's just kind of the plot of the story. So something that's important for all the stories that we're reading like this, and when we're looking for messages about gender, I think the way to think about it is: does the story, any of the stories that we're reading, does it reinforce sexist ideology or like sexism generally, or does it undermine sexist ideology and like sexist attitudes, sexist ways of thinking? So like in Araby, I talked about how like the boy losing faith in those kind of stereotypical gender dynamics that maybe that undermines sexist ideology, right? If you take my reading of it at least. So I think here, kind of the main piece of like sexist attitudes that I think the story is engaging with is the idea that women are kind of solely responsible for raising family or for taking care of children and doing these sorts of things. Because if we think about like why Evelyn wants to leave, it's because her life is very difficult. Number one, I think it tells us a few times it's repeated how like hard her life is, and just like the amount of work that she's constantly doing. Both, she has this job at I guess as a cashier or something, working at the stores, like she says, and then also cooking for these kids, making sure they go to school, taking care of her two younger siblings. So it talks about how hard her life is, definitely. But then there's another part. I think this is page 48. Let me see if I can find it really quick. Where I think we get some insight into why she wants to leave her home, right? So this is at the very top of 48. She says, people would treat her with respect then. She would not be treated as her mother had been. I think this is her like fantasizing about what it would like to be in Argentina with Frank. She says, then she would be married and people would respect her, and she wouldn't have the life her mother had. So I think it's interesting that respect is the thing that she emphasizes. I don't really know what to do with that, but I guess, yeah, she doesn't feel respected in any aspect of her life. She just has to work very hard, and no one, is very thankful or anything. And then the other thing is she would not be treated as her mother had been. So she sees her mother's life, I think, as a kind of cautionary tale, as something she desperately wants to avoid, right? But anyway, I was trying to say, so the main sexist attitude here, like I said, it relates to like women taking care of kids, being in the home the whole time, right? So I think there's like kind of like this tension between like responsibility on the one hand and like I don't know, I guess like selfishness on the other hand. But then and that's kind of like one way of framing it, right? That like, oh, for a woman to raise the kids and stay with the family, that's being responsible. And if you want to go out and have your own life and make your own achievements, that's being selfish. That's kind of a like sexist framing to look at it, right? So I think another way that we could look at this is like instead of responsibility, we could say something like self-sacrifice versus instead of selfishness, we could say freedom. You know, so because I think you could say that the kind of standard idea that like women are supposed to only care about others, right? They're supposed to just give themselves to other people and not do anything for themselves. And so I think you could call that responsible, or you could call it self-sacrificial, right? And focusing on yourself and going after your own wants and desires in life, you could call that selfish, or you could call it freedom. So I think that's kind of the tensions between this kind of devotion to others, doing everything for the family, and then versus like taking care of yourself and doing the things you need to do to have a happy life on your own. Because if we look at like why is what happened to Evelyn's mother such a cautionary tale for her, and I think it's because she sees her mother's life as one of like constantly working hard, never being appreciated for it, and never really attaining your own happiness until the mother like finally becomes delusional or something and then dies. And Evelyn sees that and it's just like, I can't let that happen to me. I have to get out of here or else that's what's going to happen to me. You know? So in that way, we can see like going with Frank as like choosing more freedom or like doing what's good for you, right? Because she doesn't talk that much about it, but like what's going to happen to the rest of the family if she leaves? The father's a drunk, the other brother isn't really there, so you would think that the family is probably going to be worse off for it. Here's another kind of interesting thing that I wonder where I think like sexism and gender comes into play is like why is it Evelyn who's expected to do all of this, who's expected to keep the family together and take care of the house and cook for the kids and whatever. um, because I think her brother and I mean the answer to that is that she promises her mother, right? At one point she talks about like towards the end of her mother's life, her mother like made her promise um, to like keep the family together as long as she can. Yeah, that's on page 50. She says, "Strange that she come to the very night of the promise to her mother, her promise to keep the home together as long as she could." So like, why is it Evelyn who has to make this promise? I think her brother's older, right? The one living older brother. I think he is older than her, the one who decorates the churches or whatever. I'm assuming that he's older than 18 or whatever if he has a job decorating churches. Maybe I'm wrong about that. But it would seem to me that that brother would probably be the more reasonable person to ask, or like to ask the oldest, right? That would seem the most obvious thing to do. But it seems like, yeah, that Evelyn is tasked with this because she is a woman, and really for no other reason. So I think that's one way we can see gender playing into this. And then just to give a quote for what I was talking before about the way Evelyn sees her mother as a cautionary tale, also on page 50, as she mused, the pitiful vision of her mother's life laid its spell on the very quick of her being, that life of commonplace sacrifices closing in final craziness. And then after that, we get she stood in a sudden impulse of terror, escape, she must escape, Frank would save her. So yeah, I think that kind of lays out like what exactly makes her want to leave. There's this vision of a life only lived for others without any happiness for yourself, and she can't deal with that because why should anyone have to live like that, right? Okay, so we've talked about why she wants to go at the beginning of the story. So then I guess the question is, well, why doesn't she go then? If all of that's true, and it might be that the answer to this question maybe affects like what we think the message of the story ultimately is. So I can only think of really maybe like two answers to this for why she doesn't go. Like one could just be, in this debate she's having about her responsibility to the family and taking care of herself, that she decides, well, I have to take care of the family. I owe them. I'm obligated. Whatever. And if we viewed it that way, then I don't know. Would that be the story embracing like the kind of sexist idea of like women being the ones who are responsible for this? I don't know. And we don't know exactly why. We're not in her head to know why, right? She's just kind of standing there and not moving, and Frank is calling to her to come on, and she just is like stuck to the ground. She's just glued there. So something else that I think about when I consider this ending is like well, number one, you could ask the question of like, how do we know like how if Frank is really telling the truth about all this stuff? Like, there's one point where she talks about him telling her how he traveled to all these places on boats and that he met whatever like all these like native peoples of uncivilized places, and that he's been to all these like famous locations and stuff. And it's like, how much of that is true? I don't know. Should we think that's true? And then like the idea that he has a house waiting for her in Buenos Aires. Like, should we believe that? Should she believe that? There'd be like a lot of things to trust there, right? But here's something else. If she went to Argentina with Frank, right? She's gonna be his wife. He has a house set up. He works or whatever. What would really be different for her? How would her life really change? I mean, we don't know if they would have kids. I guess I don't know. Given the time period and stuff, maybe we can assume that Frank probably would want to have kids. So then, if they have kids, wouldn't she just again be stuck living for others, taking care of the family, the commonplace sacrifices and final madness or whatever that she's worried about? Wouldn't she just end up still being her mother? Because like I don't know, are there different opportunities for women in Argentina in 1910 or 12 or whatever? Maybe there were. I'm not totally sure. Or maybe she could not just like live with Frank as a wife. Maybe she would want to leave him and do something else. Who knows? But yeah, I think that's kind of persuasive to me of like, would she really be able to escape the thing that she's ultimately afraid of by just going and getting married with this guy? Because it's like the kind of sexism that says that women just have to take care of the family and that's it. I don't know if I don't think that would be gone in Argentina. I think Frank probably also sees it that way. Another thing that I want to note here is like there's like a common kind of feminism that where they just view it as they look at like the 1950s in America of like women as housewives and stuff and say, well, feminism, like equality would be women also being able to go to work and stuff. And I that's true in a way, right? Obviously, it was sexist to make women only be able to take care of the house or whatever. But like, I think there's also a flaw to that way of thinking because it's like, all right, well, now it's not really like that, like women don't just stay in the house now. Um, but why did that happen? Well, I think it's because we don't really make enough money and we need both parents to work now. That pretty much every family, both parents have to work. It's not really because women want to work or because they're doing, some kind of fulfilling job that makes them happy. It's usually just because nowadays one job's not enough for a family. So I think about that too with her because she has a job in Ireland, right? So I think that kind of shows that this common idea of like, oh, well, just let people get jobs and then that'll solve everything. That like, well, if it's a shitty job, that doesn't really do much, or if it's a job that doesn't pay a lot of money, that doesn't really help the right way. Like I wonder if Evelyn's job in Ireland, if that job had just paid her more money, because she talks about how she spends her entire salary on groceries basically for the family, and even that's not enough. She has to get money from other people too. So I wonder if, I don't know, there was maybe a higher minimum wage, if that would change this. Like if then it would be possible for her to save up money and go out and get her own house eventually or whatever. Um, I think the other obvious thing here is like education, right? Like, because James Joyce, the guy who wrote these books, when he was 19, he was probably going to college, and it probably was not an option for Evelyn to go to college. But I think that gets overemphasized a lot of the time too, because maybe some people just don't want to go to college, or like not everybody wants or needs to be an office worker, or I don't even know if that'd be possible. We probably don't have enough office jobs. So that's another thing that gets brought up a lot with like gender equality is like, oh, we need to make education more equal. And it's like, well, not every woman is going to be, a CEO or an executive. A lot of people, a lot of women too, like are still going to work at grocery stores and all other kinds of like service jobs, right? So I think that's another thing about this story that I look at it now where I'm like, well, maybe if her job just paid her more money, she could have done other things and she wouldn't have to run away with Frank. She could kind of take control of her own life a little more. Because I think that's kind of what's at the heart of this too. It's just that in either situation, Evelyn doesn't really have control of her life. Obviously, in the situation now with the family, she doesn't really get to choose what she does. She has responsibility she has to take care of. And then if she goes with Frank, well, now he's going to kind of be in control of her life. And that was the way it was for a long time, where you would go, as a woman, you would go from being controlled by a father to controlled by a husband. And nowhere in there is there space to, find yourself or what you really want to do with your life or whatever. So, yeah, I was just trying to say that I wonder if another reason that she doesn't go is that, yeah, she realizes that this would not be independence, right? Going with Frank is not going to give her independence. It's just going to give her dependence to a different person in a different situation, I guess. So maybe the reason that she's like paralyzed there, where she can't even move at the end of the story, is because there's no good option, you know. Uh, and maybe that's what the boy at the end of Araby, maybe that's how he's feeling too. It's just like, wow, like we're fucked. But yeah, so I think by telling the story, if we're looking for the message, right, I think we could say that the story shows us the lack of any sort of opportunities for women during this time period, or it shows us like how the sexist ideology that women can only be mothers or whatever, or it's not even that in this story because Evelyn has a job, right? Or the idea that it's only their responsibility that women should just live for other people. I think we can see the story criticizing that idea, definitely, because that's what's constantly being forced on Evelyn, and she's trying to find a way out of it and not really succeeding. So I don't know if we view the story as pessimistic in that way, like that there's no way out of this, or maybe we could see it as like just like with the way society currently is, we need to make a way out of it or something like that. But yeah, I think we could see it in that way, like criticizing or undermining the sexist attitude that women should just be taking care of other people all the time. And I guess that's what I'll say about it. I really do like this story, and I think it does a good job showing the kind of larger social conditions, like I said, with like getting paid at very low wages at a job, and how just changing that could have opened up like more possibilities for independence for Evelyn. All right, that's it for now. Talk to you soon.